You are an embarrassment to everything this family built, and I am done pretending otherwise." My daughter's voice cut through 200 conversations at once, and every one of them stopped mid-sentence to listen. I was standing near the head table in a rented navy blazer that still smelled faintly of the dry cleaner's plastic, holding a glass of water I hadn't touched. And I watched my only child point a microphone-amplified accusation directly at my chest in front of the entire leadership of Ridgeline Capital Group, the company I had quietly financed into existence 12 years earlier. A man who never built anything of his own doesn't get to stand in this room and act like he belongs among people who actually did, Vanessa said, and her voice didn't shake at all. That was the part that stayed with me longest. Not the words, the steadiness underneath them, somewhere near the back of the ballroom. A champagne tower someone had bumped in the commotion of people turning to look at me finally gave up its balance and came down in a long silver crash of glass. And for one absurd moment, 200 well-dressed strangers were staring at broken crystal and spilled gold liquid pooling across the parquet floor instead of at me, and I used that half-second of distraction to do the only thing that felt like mine to do. I set my water glass down on the nearest table, straightened my jacket, and did not look away from my daughter's face. She had Margaret's eyes. She had always had Margaret's eyes, even when she was small and furious about something as simple as bedtime, and it had never once occurred to me, in 63 years of living, that I would stand in a hotel ballroom in Charlotte, North Carolina, and watch those exact eyes look at me like I was something that needed to be swept up along with the broken glass. I did not know yet that within the hour, a man worth more money than everyone else in that room combined would rise from his seat at the head table, walk the length of the ballroom in front of all of them, and give me his chair. I did not know that my daughter's husband had spent 18 months quietly building a legal case to have me declared incapable of managing my own affairs, using tonight as its centerpiece. I did not know that my 9-year-old granddaughter had been carrying a secret so heavy it had kept her awake 3 nights running, or that in 20 minutes I would be sitting on a folding chair in a service corridor that smelled like industrial dish soap, holding my late wife's handkerchief in one hand and my cracked phone in the other, dialing the one number I kept for exactly this kind of night. All I knew, standing there while the broken glass was swept away and the band uncertainly resumed playing something soft and forgettable, was that my daughter had just called me a failure in front of 200 people, and that somewhere behind her carefully composed fury, something about the way she'd said it didn't sound entirely like her own voice. It sounded rehearsed. It sounded like a line she had been fed and had, God help her, believed. If you're watching this, drop a comment and tell me where you're tuning in from tonight. I read every single one. This story carries fictional elements woven in for the sake of the telling, though I suspect more of you will recognize pieces of it than you'd expect. Spinect. Stay with me. What happened in that ballroom changes everything, but it didn't start there. It started 4 weeks earlier, on an ordinary Tuesday evening, with a phone call I almost didn't answer, 24 hours before I found myself standing under those chandeliers. I was standing in my own kitchen on Birchwood Lane in Asheville, watching the last gray light of a December Thursday fade behind the ridge of mountains I'd looked at every evening for 31 years. It was 5:40 in the morning, if I'm being honest about which direction the light was moving, because at 63 I don't sleep the way I used to, and the coffee maker on my counter, the same one that had been making an off-key gurgling sound since roughly 2018, which Margaret would have replaced within the week and which I had simply learned to live alongside, was doing its usual complaining. Margaret had been gone 9 years. Long enough that the ache had settled into something more like weather than wound, present but no longer surprising. Not long enough that I'd stopped leaving her spot at the kitchen table empty, or that I'd gotten around to doing anything about the camellia bushes she'd planted along the side fence. The ones that bloomed pink and stubborn every February whether anyone tended them or not. She'd chosen camellia specifically, she told me once, because they were the one thing in the garden too tough to need her permission to survive. I poured my coffee and stood at the window with the mountains, still deciding whether to be blue or black in the coming light. And I thought, the way I thought most mornings, that it was enough. The coffee, the quiet, her camellias holding their ground through another winter, and the photograph above the toaster of Vanessa at her college graduation. 22 years old, an arm looped through mine and one through her mother's. All three of us squinting into a June sun. Neither of us had been smart enough to stand with our backs to. My phone buzzed on the counter at 5:43. Maisie. I knew before I looked, the way you know things after enough years of loving someone small enough to still call you every morning before school, Grandpa. Her voice came through thin and careful, the particular carefulness of a 9-year-old who has rehearsed a sentence in her head more than once before saying it out loud. You're still coming tomorrow night, right, to Mom's big party? Wouldn't miss it, I said, easing into the kitchen chair with the leg I'd shimmed with a folded napkin sometime around 2020 and never gotten around to fixing properly. Why do you ask, sweetheart? A pause. Not the distracted pause of a child with cartoons playing somewhere behind her, a weighted one. No reason, she said, too quickly. And then quieter, just be careful tomorrow, okay? Like, really careful. My hand tightened slightly around the coffee mug. Careful of what, Maisie? Another pause, longer this time, and then a sound in the background. A door, maybe, or footsteps on hardwood. And her voice shifted instantly into something breezier, the practiced lightness of a child who has just heard someone coming and is performing normalcy for an audience that isn't me. Nothing. I just meant drive safe. It's supposed to be icy on the parkway. I'll drive safe, I told her. You eat something before school. She said she would. She hung up. I sat there with the dead phone warm in my palm and thought about the pause underneath the words, the way I'd learned to do with Maisie, since she was old enough to have things she didn't know how to say plainly yet. 9 years old is an age where a child understands that something is wrong, long before she has the vocabulary to explain what, and I had spent enough decades reading load-bearing structures for a living to know that the crack you can't quite see is usually the one that matters most. I told myself it was nerves. Big parties made children anxious, and children absorbed the anxiety of the households they lived in the way clothing absorbs wood smoke, invisibly, completely, without anyone's permission. That's all it was. Ambient worry, borrowed from a house where the air had probably been running a little thin for a while now. I almost believed it. 3 weeks earlier, on a rainy Tuesday evening in late November, I'd gotten a different call. I was sitting in the den with the television off, the way I did most evenings since Margaret passed, existing quietly in a house built for 2 people that now held one. My phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen in longer than I like to admit. Marcus, my son-in-law, and I spoke perhaps 3 or 4 times a year, and 2 of those were the obligatory 90-second exchanges that happen at holiday gatherings when 2 men who have nothing to say to each other are handed the same piece of pie. I answered anyway. Warren. His voice came through warm, almost aggressively warm, the specific warmth of someone who has practiced a tone before picking up the phone, rather than discovering it naturally in the moment. Glad I caught you. Marcus, everything all right? Better than all right. I'm calling about Ridgeline's 10th anniversary gala. It's the 19th, at the Ashcombe Grand downtown. Investors, board members, the whole leadership team. Vanessa and I really want you there. I set my coffee cup down slowly on the side table. Vanessa and you want me there, I repeated. Of course, it was actually Vanessa's idea, not a flicker of hesitation in the sentence. She feels strongly that family should be present for a milestone like this. I had known Marcus Whitfield for 12 years, long enough to recognize the particular texture of a sentence he'd built, rather than one he'd simply felt. This one had the faint mechanical smoothness of something rehearsed until its rough edges had been sanded away. My stomach turned over once, quietly, and I kept my voice easy. That's thoughtful, I said. What time should I be there? He gave me the details, 7 o'clock, black tie encouraged, valet available at the Ashcomb's front entrance. He mentioned the guest list twice, the caliber of investors twice. How much it would mean to Vanessa 3 separate times in 4 different phrasings, which was 2 more times than a true thing usually needs saying. We'll see you there, he said, and hung up before I could ask anything further. I sat with the dead phone in my hand for a long moment, listening to my own house around me, the refrigerator cycling on, wind pressing against the window glass, the particular silence of a place that has held the same 2 decades of a person's thoughts and knows how to keep them without comment. Then I called Vanessa. She picked up on the fourth ring, distracted, the sound of an open-plan office humming behind her voice. "Hey, Dad, Marcus called about the anniversary gala," I said. "Was the invitation your idea?" A pause, brief, almost imperceptible. But I'd learned to hear those the way I'd learned to hear the wind shift before a storm off the Blue Ridge. "Yeah, of course it was. You should come, Dad." "Yeah, of course it was." The words of someone confirming a dentist appointment, not inviting her father to the most important night of her professional life. "I'll drive down," I said. "Don't worry about arranging anything for me." "Great. Listen, I've got a call in 2 minutes, can we?" "Go ahead," I said. "I'll see you on the 19th. She hung up. I sat with the phone against my knee and looked across the den at the framed photograph on the mantel. The three of us at her graduation, the same one that hung above my kitchen toaster in a different frame, because some pictures earn the right to be everywhere in a house. She'd been 22 in that picture. She still called every Sunday back then. She still laughed at my terrible jokes without checking her watch first. I got up, my knees registering their usual complaint, and walked down the hallway to what used to be Margaret's sewing room, and had become, over the years, something closer to my study, a drafting table she'd always called an eyesore, and I'd always called essential. 3 decades of engineering manuals I hadn't opened since retirement, and at the bottom of the oak desk, a manila folder held shut with a rubber band that had been there so long it had partially fused to the paper. Foster Lindqvist had put that folder together in March of 2011, organized it with the particular thoroughness of a man who believed that the difference between protected and unprotected often came down to a single clause buried in the third paragraph of a document nobody expected to matter, and then handed me the copy with instructions that were simple and absolute. Keep it safe. Tell no one. You'll know when it's needed. I had hoped, for 12 years, that I would never need it. I opened the drawer, took the folder out, and turned the pages slowly. Not reading exactly, since I knew every line of it by heart, but running my thumb along the edges the way you might handle something that has waited a long time for the moment it was made for. Outside, the November rain kept up its steady drumming against the study window, and the house creaked once, softly, the way old houses do when the temperature drops and something inside them settles. It was Vanessa's idea, actually. I closed the folder, snapped the rubber band back into place, and slid the drawer shut. Marcus Whitfield had called me on a rainy Tuesday with a rehearsed voice and a story that didn't quite hold its own weight, and the part of me that had spent 35 years as a structural engineer reading the exact point where a load-bearing wall was hiding a problem told me plainly that the invitation wasn't really an invitation at all. I just didn't know yet what it actually was. I've read the phrase self-made applied to my daughter's company in 4 separate business magazines over the past 6 years. The first time, I was sitting at this same kitchen table with my morning coffee, and I read the sentence twice, then set the magazine face down and went outside to check on Margaret's camellias, even though it wasn't the season for it. The second time, I tore the page out, folded it carefully, and put it in the folder in my study drawer, not out of anger, but because a man ought to keep an accurate record of the story being told about his own life, even the parts that get the facts wrong. Vanessa Holt did not build Ridgeline Capital Group from nothing. She built it from $410,000 of my retirement savings, and Margaret's life insurance, 35 years of engineering and construction contacts I'd accumulated across a career of public infrastructure projects, and one phone call I made on her behalf to a man named Nathaniel Cross on a cold February afternoon in 2014. Let me tell you how it actually started. It was the spring of 2011, and Vanessa was 29 years old, 6 months laid off from a regional real estate firm that had gutted its acquisitions team during the slow recovery years, and living in a 1-bedroom apartment above a dry cleaner's in downtown Asheville, that she couldn't really afford anymore. She showed up at my door on a Saturday morning in April with a folder of hand-drawn charts and a business plan she'd clearly been building in secret for months, and shadows under her eyes that told me she hadn't been sleeping well, and something in her face I recognized instantly because I had worn it myself once, decades earlier, on the morning I signed my first construction contract. Dad. Her voice came out rougher than she meant it to. I need to show you something. We spread the papers across this same kitchen table. Boutique commercial redevelopment. Her plan called it buying distressed retail and office properties in transitioning downtown corridors across the southeast, renovating them with an eye for the small businesses the big developers overlooked, and holding them for long-term appreciation instead of flipping fast. Her hands shook slightly as she arranged the pages. How much do you need? I asked her. Before she'd finished the second paragraph, she blinked. Dad. I haven't even explained the model yet. How much? She named a figure. $410,000, her estimate for 18 months of runway, initial property acquisitions, and legal setup. She said it carefully, watching my face, braced for the conversation to go sideways. Give me a week, I told her. I need to talk to Foster Dad. Why would you need a lawyer to? Because if I'm going to invest my retirement in your company, I said, I'm going to do it correctly. The silence that followed lasted about 4 seconds, and then her eyes went red at the rims, and she looked out the window at Margaret's bare winter camellia stalks, jaw working, trying to hold herself together, and not entirely succeeding. My own chest felt like something large had settled into it. The particular ache of something heavy landing exactly where it was supposed to. Foster Lindfist had been my attorney since 1993 when he helped Margaret and me refinance this house. He was 78 now, sharp as a man half his age, and constitutionally incapable of doing anything by half measures. When I explained what I wanted, investment structured through a private family trust, controlling interest retained, Vanessa given full operational authority without knowing the extent of my ownership stake, he went quiet on the line for a long moment. You want to protect her, he said, but you also want to protect yourself. I want to protect both of us from a version of this where it goes wrong and nobody has any recourse, I said. That's the same thing, Foster said. Give me 10 days. The trust structure he built was elegant in its simplicity. Capital flowed in through layered holding entities. My controlling 54% interest sat documented and secured at the trust level, invisible to anyone who didn't know precisely where to look. Vanessa saw the investment exactly as I told her it was, her father believing in her enough to write a very large check, which was also entirely true. Both things were true at once. That is the nature of structures. They do not change the meaning of what is inside them. By early 2014, Ridgeline had 3 completed projects and a growing reputation that was outpacing what Vanessa's operating capital could comfortably carry. She needed a major partner, someone with deeper pockets and a wider network than a 32-year-old developer with 3 years on the ground could reasonably attract on her own. I called Nathaniel Cross on a Thursday afternoon in February. Nathaniel and I had worked together in the late 90s, when I served as project engineer on a bridge rehabilitation his engineering consultancy had partnered on, before he'd left the technical side of the business entirely to build Cross Meridian Holdings into one of the more respected private investment firms in the Carolinas. We weren't close friends exactly, but we trusted each other, and in my experience that has always proven far more durable than friendship. I'm calling about my daughter's company, I told him. I think it's worth an hour of your time. Tell me about her, Nathaniel said. I told him the truth, not the polished version, the actual one. A young woman who'd built something real out of a difficult starting point, who made smart decisions under pressure, who had the capacity to build something much larger with the right partner behind her. I told him I believed in Vanessa the way I believed in sound engineering. Not blindly, but on the evidence. He met with her the following month. By spring, Cross Meridian had committed to a significant capital partnership. He never told her about my call. I never told her either, because what she needed, what I understood even then, maybe especially then, was to believe she had earned it entirely on her own merit, and she had. She'd done the work, made the calls, closed the deals. The phone call I made to Nathaniel Cross didn't make Vanessa successful. Her own effort did that. I only made sure the door was open when she reached it. By 2018, Ridgeline had 40 employees and a name that was beginning to travel beyond the Carolinas. That was the year Vanessa came home from an industry conference in Charlotte, talking about a man named Marcus Whitfield, a finance director at a competing firm who had, in her words, the kind of confidence that fills a room without trying too hard. Margaret was still alive then, though not for much longer. I remember sitting beside her hospital bed the Sunday Vanessa brought Marcus to meet her for the first time. Margaret held his hand and told him he seemed steady, which was at the time true. After they'd stepped out for coffee, she turned her head against the pillow and looked at me with those eyes that had always seen further ahead than I could manage. "Warren," she said, her voice already thinning, "watch over her." I took her hand in both of mine. "Always," I told her. "You know I will." She passed 4 months later, on a gray Tuesday morning in March, with my hand still in hers and Vanessa sitting on her other side, crying in a way I hadn't seen from my daughter since she was small, open, unguarded, without any attempt at composure. I remember thinking, watching her that day, that whatever the company and the money and the years had begun to change in her, the part of her that knew how to love hadn't gone anywhere. I held on to that thought longer than the evidence in the end would justify. Downtown Charlotte at 7:15 on a Friday evening in December smelled like rain on warm asphalt, and the particular electric ambition that only exists in cities still trying to prove something about themselves. I'd parked 2 blocks from the Ashcombe Grand, in a garage that charged more for 3 hours than my father used to charge for a week of framing work, and walked the rest of the way with my collar up against a wind that had teeth in it. The hotel entrance rose out of the dark ahead of me, glass doors framed in brushed steel, a uniformed doorman under a heated awning. Warm gold light, spilling out onto the sidewalk, with the specific engineering of a space designed to make you feel, the moment you approached it, that you were arriving somewhere important. I had spent 35 years building structures across 3 states. None of them had ever looked quite like this. I found my collar, straightened my rented blazer, and thought about Maisie's voice at 5:43 that morning. "Be careful tomorrow. Really careful." I walked toward the light. Inside that ballroom, 200 people were already gathering to celebrate the company I had built with my daughter, without her ever fully knowing it. I had no idea, stepping through those glass doors, just how completely that fact was about to come to the surface, or how close I had come, 4 weeks earlier, to believing this invitation was simply what it claimed to be. The heat hit me first, that aggressively comfortable temperature only expensive hotels maintain regardless of the season outside. Then the smell, fresh flowers, leather, something faintly citrus pumped through a ventilation system that almost certainly cost more per month than my property taxes. The lobby floor was pale marble, and the chandelier overhead looked large enough to require its own zoning permit. A young man in a hotel uniform near the coat check tracked me from the door to the ballroom hallway, with the specific expression of someone trying to decide whether I was a guest or a problem. I was wearing a blazer I'd bought off a department store rack 11 years ago, and I was not wearing a watch that cost 4 figures, and he had clearly arrived at a preliminary conclusion. "Sir," he said, stepping forward, "can I help you find your table?" "Warren Holt," I said, "Vanessa Holt's father." Something recalibrated behind his eyes. "Of course, Mr. Holt. Right this way, Dad." The voice came from my left, timed with the kind of precision that requires either genuine instinct or considerable rehearsal. Vanessa crossed the lobby marble toward me in a deep emerald gown, her dark hair pinned with the exacting effortlessness that takes considerable time and money to achieve. She was, objectively, a striking woman standing in a striking room that had never once been the issue between us. She took both my hands in hers and squeezed, her smile wide and warm from any angle beyond arm's length. "You made it all the way from Asheville," she said, her voice carrying just far enough to reach the coat check attendant and the couple waiting by the elevator. "All the way from Asheville." 130 miles on a clear interstate. She made it sound like I'd crossed a mountain range on foot, which, I suppose, in a manner of speaking, I nearly had. Wouldn't have missed it, I said. Come on. She tucked her arm through mine. Not the way a daughter walks with her father, but the way a handler moves a piece into position. Everyone's already inside. She steered me toward the ballroom through the widest, most crowded part of the lobby rather than the shorter side entrance, and I noted it the way a man notes the load path in a building he's about to walk into. Filed it, said nothing, kept walking. I found Maisie almost immediately. She had always been easy for me to spot in any room, some quality in the way she held herself that my eyes recognized before my brain caught up. She was at a round table near the wall, in a navy dress that was clearly new, her hair already coming loose from its careful morning braid, and the moment she saw me, her whole face lit with the unguarded joy children carry before the world teaches them to ration it. She started to rise. Vanessa's hand tightened, almost imperceptibly, on my arm and angled us both toward the stage instead. Marcus wants to introduce you to a few people before the toasts start, she said brightly. Big night for him, too. I looked back at Maisie. She'd settled into her chair, watching us with dark eyes that missed considerably less than most adults gave her credit for. Her mouth shaped two silent words across the noise of the room. I'm sorry. We reached Marcus near the edge of the stage, deep in conversation with two men in dark suits, his posture doing the specific thing it did when he was performing confidence rather than feeling it. Shoulders a shade too square, laugh landing half a beat too fast. He clocked me over his shoulder and gave a single small nod, the kind you offer someone whose presence you've accepted rather than sought. The band struck up something warm and forgettable. Servers moved through the crowd with trays of champagne, and somewhere behind Vanessa's continuous pleasant narration about the guest list and the evening's schedule, I was watching the geometry of the room instead of listening, the placement of the head table, the angle of the aisles, the fact that we were being steered, again, along the most visible possible path. By 8 o'clock, the toasts had begun. Nathaniel Cross spoke first, brief and gracious, praising Ridgeline's growth, with the easy authority of a man who has said such things at 100 similar dinners. Then Marcus took the microphone, thanked the investors, thanked the board, thanked his wife with a warmth that sounded, to my ear, slightly over-rehearsed, and then he handed the microphone to Vanessa, and something in her face changed the moment she took it. A tightness around her eyes I recognized from childhood. The look she used to get right before she said something she'd talked herself into believing. 10 years ago, she began, I sat at my father's kitchen table with nothing but a business plan and more fear than confidence. And I built this company with my own two hands, my own decisions, my own risk. Applause warm and expected. I want to talk tonight about what it costs to build something real. It costs sacrifice. It costs relationships that keep pace with your growth. Her eyes found me across the room, and something under the polish cracked, just slightly. It costs watching people you love fail to become the kind of people who deserve a seat at your table. The room went quieter by degrees, the way a crowd does when it senses something has shifted from performance into something rawer. I've spent this year watching my own father grow more erratic, more unreliable, more embarrassing at every family gathering he's invited to, she said, and her voice began to shake now, not with grief, but with something that sounded underneath, almost like it had been fed to her. I've made excuses for him for years. Tonight I'm done. She looked directly at me. You are an embarrassment to everything this family built, and I am done pretending otherwise. 200 conversations stopped at once. I stood there in my rented navy blazer, my untouched water glass in hand, and felt the particular vertigo of hearing your own child describe a version of you that does not exist. Erratic. Unreliable. I had missed exactly one Sunday call to her in the past 4 years, and that had been for Margaret's memorial anniversary, which Vanessa herself had forgotten, near the back of the ballroom. In the general commotion of 200 people turning to stare, someone's elbow caught a champagne tower, and it came down in a long silver crash of shattering crystal. And for one absurd half-second, the room's attention split between me and the wreckage of glass and gold liquid spreading across the parquet. I set my water glass down. I straightened my jacket. I did not look away from my daughter's face. Good, I said, and my voice came out steadier than I had any right to expect. Now I know exactly where I stand. I turned and walked toward the service exit at the side of the ballroom, not quickly, not the hurried retreat of a humiliated man, but the measured pace of someone who has simply determined that a particular room no longer requires his presence. I kept my spine straight and my chin level, and a young man in a server's uniform held the door open for me without being asked. It swung shut behind me, and the noise of the ballroom, the low murmur beginning to reassemble itself into something resembling normal conversation, reduced itself to a muffled vibration on the other side of the wall. I stood alone in a service hallway that smelled like industrial dish soap and honest work, my heart knocking hard enough against my ribs that I attributed it to anger rather than grief, because one of those felt considerably more manageable than the other. I found a folding chair against the wall and sat, my knee announcing its long-standing objections, and I took Margaret's handkerchief from my jacket pocket. White cotton, soft at the fold lines, her initials stitched in pale blue thread, and turned it over once in my hands. The service door opened at 8:20, and Maisie slipped through sideways, one shoulder leading the way children enter spaces they aren't entirely sure they're allowed in. She crossed the hallway in 4 quick steps and wrapped both arms around my middle and held on with the fierce grip of a child who has been frightened and isn't ready yet to let go of the thing that reassures her. Grandpa. Her voice was muffled against my jacket. I heard what she said. I'm so sorry. Hey now. I put my arms around her. None of that is yours to apologize for. She pulled back far enough to look up at me, her chin trembling at the edges. It wasn't an accident, Grandpa. What she said. Uncle Marcus has been telling her stuff about you for months. My chest tightened. Tell me what you know. All of it. She took a breath and then, with the particular carefulness she'd inherited from somewhere, maybe from me, she laid it out. 2 weeks earlier, homesick from school, she'd overheard Marcus on a call in his home office, door not quite shut. He'd said, "We need documented instability before the board meeting, something public, something they can't dismiss as one person's opinion." And later, quieter, "Vanessa's primed. She believes every word I've told her. She just needs the moment." Did he say who he was talking to? I asked. Maisie shook her head. I didn't hear a name. But after he hung up, he had this look, like when he wins an argument he's been planning. I sat with that for a long moment, my granddaughter's cold hands in mine, and felt something that was less anger now than a kind of terrible clarity. The specific feeling of watching a structural failure you'd suspected finally reveal its exact fracture point. You did exactly right telling me, I said, both times. This morning and now. Is it bad, Grandpa? Some things are about to change, I told her honestly. But the people who love each other, that part doesn't change. That's not up for negotiation. She nodded, wiped her eyes fast and businesslike, and asked, with the particular directness of a 9-year-old who has decided she's done being protected from the truth, "What do you need me to do?" "Go back to your table. Act normal. Don't let your mother know you came back here." She hesitated at the door. "Grandpa, don't let them win." She slipped through before I could answer. I checked my watch, found Foster Lindqvist's number, and pressed call. He answered before the second ring finished. Warren. His voice was exactly what it always was. Unhurried, precise. The voice of a man who understood decades ago that urgency and clarity are not the same virtue. "Tell me," she said it in front of the whole room, Foster. Called me an embarrassment. Marcus fed her every word of it. Maisie confirmed it. Overheard him planning it 2 weeks ago. Something about documented instability before a board meeting. A pause on the line, not shock. Foster Lindqvist did not shock easily, but the quiet of a man cross-referencing new information against everything he already suspected. "That confirms what I've been building toward for the past 8 months, he said. "Warren, are you ready to move forward?" I thought about Margaret's last instruction. Watch over her. I thought about what watching over someone actually meant when the people around her had convinced her that your presence was the liability. "I've been ready for 3 weeks, I said. Since Marcus called, I'll need 30 minutes. Foster said. "Renata Okafor is already in the building. She flew in from Atlanta this afternoon at my request, in her capacity as independent board chair. I told her there was a reasonable chance tonight would require intervention. That stopped me cold. Renata Okafor. I had spoken with her perhaps 5 times by phone in 3 years, a woman whose reputation in corporate governance circles made seasoned attorneys straighten their ties before returning her calls. She had flown in from Atlanta on a Friday because Foster Lindqvist told her I might need her. Tell her thank you, I managed. Tell her yourself in 30 minutes, Foster said. Find somewhere to sit, Warren. You've been on your feet long enough. He hung up with the efficiency of a man with a considerable number of calls left to make. I sat back down on the folding chair with the dish soap smell and the kitchen noise around me, Margaret's handkerchief still in my hand, and waited. Foster Lindqvist walked into the Ashcombe Grand's lobby at 8:50 that evening, the way he walked into every room I had ever seen him enter. Unhurried, the measured confidence of a man who had already read the ending and found it satisfactory. 78 years old, silver hair combed back with military precision, a charcoal suit that had cost real money, and wore it without announcing the fact. He carried the same worn leather briefcase he'd owned since the 90s, refurbished twice because Foster believed quality things deserved maintenance rather than replacement. Beside him, half a step ahead, was Renata Okafor, 54, dark hair threaded with silver at the temples, a black suit tailored to the millimeter, no jewelry, beyond a pair of small pearl earrings. She moved with the particular economy of someone who'd learned long ago that every unnecessary gesture was a dilution of presence. The 2 staff members at the concierge desk straightened almost imperceptibly as she passed. People always did. Foster reached me first, gripped my hand firm and brief, his eyes flicking once to my face and finding whatever he needed there. She said it publicly, he said, not a question, in front of the full room. Marcus set it up. Maisie confirmed the planning. Good, Foster said, which from him covered a considerable range of meaning. Renata extended her hand. Mr. Holt, I'm sorry for the circumstances. I'm glad Foster called. I appreciate you making the trip, I said. He can be quite persuasive, she said with a small, precise smile, and the situation warranted it. She glanced toward the ballroom entrance. Are you prepared to proceed? I've been prepared for 3 weeks. Then let's go in. Foster opened his briefcase and handed me the top document. Brief enough to confirm the date and the notary seal. Everything in order, exactly as it had waited 12 years in the bottom drawer of my study desk for the evening it would finally be needed. We turned toward the ballroom, and that was when I saw Vanessa near the entrance, her face changing the moment she registered our small fortune crossing the lobby. Not her usual composed displeasure, but something rawer, something that recognized, before she'd consciously worked out why, that the evening had just changed shape in a direction she hadn't planned for. She turned and disappeared back through the ballroom doors, not quite running. She's going to warn Marcus, I said. Let her, Foster said without breaking stride. It won't change a thing. We reached the doors. Through the glass, I could see the room reassembling its polite fiction of normalcy. The head table, Marcus deep in conversation near the podium, Nathaniel Cross seated with a group of investors, unaware that in a few minutes his own history with me was about to become the pivot point of the entire evening. Foster put his hand on the door. Open it, Foster, I said. There is a moment in every crowded room when the air pressure changes. When enough people notice something is wrong that the whole atmosphere shifts, the way it does right before a storm rolls off the Blue Ridge. I felt it the instant Foster pushed those doors open and the 3 of us walked through. It started at the edges. A junior associate near the entrance glanced up, clocked Renata's face, and went very still. The person beside him noticed the reaction and turned to look himself. The turning spread outward, not fast, not dramatic, but with the particular inevitability of a room full of people trained to read the arrival of anyone who might matter to their professional futures. The band kept playing, but lost a little confidence in the next several bars. Stay close, Foster said quietly, which was more direction than he typically offered. Renata moved slightly ahead of us, not leading exactly, more the way a ship's prow moves through water, opening the space we needed to cross the room. Staff members stepped back as she passed. A senior manager near the bar set down his drink without seeming to notice he'd done it. I kept my eyes forward and did not look at the LED screen mounted over the stage, which I could see peripherally had switched from the evening's highlight reel to a static company logo. Someone had made a quiet decision about what to broadcast after the toast. Marcus broke away from a cluster of men near the podium and intercepted us, his jaw set, his eyes doing a rapid assessment of the three-person formation crossing his ballroom floor. Vanessa stood near the head table, one hand pressed flat against her throat, a gesture I had never once seen from her, and it told me more about her internal state than anything she could have said aloud. Warren. Marcus dropped his voice, aiming for a register that would contain the conversation. What is this? Who are these people? You know Foster, I said. This is Renata Okafor, Ridgeline's independent board chair. Marcus's eyes cut to Renata with barely concealed alarm. I didn't realize you'd be attending tonight, Miss Okafor. I flew in from Atlanta this afternoon, she said pleasantly, at Mr. Lindqvist's request in my capacity as board chair. I hope that's not inconvenient. A brief pause, precisely calibrated to land. There must be some misunderstanding, Marcus said. Tonight is a company celebration, not a board matter. I don't see why that should trouble anyone, Marcus. The voice came from the right side of the room, unhurried, carrying easily over the ambient noise of 200 people pretending not to stare. Nathaniel Cross rose from his seat at the head table, 66 years old, silver-haired, a man whose network across the Carolinas ran deep enough that a considerable portion of the room owed some piece of their professional existence to a door he'd either opened or declined to close. He crossed the floor toward us with the unhurried pace of someone who has already decided exactly what he intends to do. He stopped in front of me. I hadn't seen Nathaniel in person in almost 2 years. He looked older. We all did. But his eyes hadn't changed. Dark, observant, missing considerably less than most people assumed. He looked at my rented blazer, then at my face, and then Nathaniel Cross, the wealthiest man in that ballroom by a margin that wasn't close, reached down, took hold of the empty chair beside his own place at the head table and pulled it out. Warren, he said, his voice carrying to every table within 30 feet without effort, sit here. This seat belongs to you tonight more than it belongs to me. The room went silent enough that I heard a champagne flute set down 3 tables away. Nathaniel, that's not necessary. It is necessary, he said, firm and entirely without accommodation. He turned to face the room generally, though his words were aimed squarely at Marcus and, beyond him, Vanessa. Most of you know me as the man who backed this company's national expansion in 2014. What most of you don't know is that I only took that meeting because a structural engineer I trusted more than almost anyone in my professional life called me and told me his daughter was worth betting on. I trusted his judgment then. I'll trust it now. He looked at me directly. You didn't build Ridgeline sitting in the back of this room, Warren. Sit up front, where you should have been seated from the start. Marcus's mouth opened, then closed. Vanessa's hand dropped from her throat, her face gone the color of the marble floor beneath us. I sat. My knee protested the whole way down. Nathaniel remained standing beside me, one hand resting briefly on my shoulder, and I felt something in my chest come loose that had been wound tight since 7:45 that evening. Foster set his briefcase on the nearest table and clicked it open with the unhurried efficiency of a man who had waited 12 years for precisely this moment. Mr. Whitfield, he said, addressing Marcus with the careful neutrality of someone about to change the room's entire geometry. There are some things you and your wife need to understand about Ridgeline Capital Group. Foster Lindqvist never raised his voice. That was what made him so effective. He delivered the most devastating information in the same unhurried tone most people reserve for reading a grocery list, and somehow the contrast made every word land harder. These, he said, laying 3 documents on the table, are the founding capitalization records of Ridgeline Capital Group, filed with the North Carolina Secretary of State in June of 2011. I know my own founding records, Marcus said. I've reviewed every page of this company's history. You've reviewed the operating agreement, Foster said pleasantly. These are the trust documents that preceded it. The Warren and Margaret Holt Family Trust, established March of 2011, which provided the seed capital for the company's formation through a series of layered holding entities. He paused to let it land. Warren invested $410,000 of his own retirement and his late wife's life insurance. He structured it through a trust that retained controlling interest, 54% at the trust level. Vanessa received full operational authority. Warren retained ultimate ownership. The room had gone entirely quiet around us. The investors who'd been maintaining polite fictions of not listening had abandoned the pretense entirely. Vanessa's voice cut through, thin and disbelieving. "That's not, Dad, that's not possible. I would have known." "The structure was designed so you wouldn't," Foster said. "Not as deception, as protection. Your father's instructions were explicit. You were to have every opportunity to succeed or fail on your own decisions. The controlling interest existed as a safeguard, not a leash." Vanessa turned to me, and the expression on her face was one I hadn't seen since she was a teenager, raw, unguarded, stripped of every layer of executive polish. "You've held controlling interest in my company for 12 years, she said, "and you let me stand up there tonight and call you a failure." My throat tightened. "I told you I believed in you," I said quietly. "That was always the part that mattered to me." "What was the point?" Marcus said, and something in his tone had shifted, sharper now, cornered, of keeping it hidden if it was just going to come out eventually. "What was the actual point, Warren?" "The point," Nathaniel Cross said from beside me, "was that Vanessa deserved a chance to be taken seriously on her own merit before anyone knew her father's money was behind her. I met with her in 2014 because Warren called me and told me she was worth betting on. I never told her that call happened. This company exists at its current scale because of that phone call and because of every decision Vanessa made after it. Both things are true at once." One of the seniors investors at a nearby table, a woman named Priya Deshmukh, who I would learn later chaired Ridgeline's audit committee, leaned forward with an expression that had moved decisively past polite curiosity. "Marcus," she said, "did you represent this company's ownership structure to the board as fully disclosed and independently built?" Marcus's jaw worked. "I didn't know about the trust structure. I genuinely did not know." "That may be true," Foster said. "But there is something you did know, Mr. Whitfield, and I'd like to address it directly." He reached into the briefcase a second time. 18 months ago, you retained an attorney in Winston-Salem to explore the legal mechanisms available for challenging a trust beneficiary's controlling interest on the grounds of diminished mental capacity. The room reacted, not loudly. The crowd was too polished for loud, but in the specific way of people arriving simultaneously at an uncomfortable understanding. Vanessa's head turned slowly toward her husband, the motion carrying a terrible deliberateness, like someone turning to look at something she already knows will hurt. "Diminished mental capacity," Foster continued, "is a legitimate legal standard under North Carolina law. It can, when properly established through medical evaluation and documented behavioral evidence, be used to petition a court for the removal of a person's authority over trust assets. It is a real legal mechanism. It is also, in this instance, the framework Mr. Whitfield has spent the better part of a year and a half constructing around his father-in-law." "That's a grotesque mischaracterization," Marcus said, his voice sharp now, clipped, every word bitten off clean. "That was a private legal consultation." "It stopped being private," Foster said, "when the attorney you retained decided the arrangement raised serious ethical concerns and documented it in writing. This is his account, dated 11 months ago. He set a 2-page letter on the table. Vanessa made a sound, low and involuntary, the sound a person makes when something lands in their chest before they can brace for it. "Marcus," she said, "the party tonight. What I said up there, did you? I need you to understand." Marcus started. "Everything I did was to protect what we built." "What we built," Vanessa repeated, her voice cracking clean down the middle. "You told me for months that my father had been calling investors behind my back, undermining deals, embarrassing us at events I wasn't even at. You told me things about him that weren't true, and I believed you, Because you're my husband and I trusted you, and tonight you had me stand up in front of 200 people and call my own father." She couldn't finish it. Her hand came up to cover her mouth. Nathaniel's voice was quiet and direct. "I want it said clearly, for this room. What Marcus orchestrated tonight was a documented, deliberate act, engineered to be captured by 200 witnesses, and whatever recording exists of that toast. The man on the receiving end of it has more integrity in that department store blazer than anyone in this room who laughed." Several of the junior associates near the back studied the floor with sudden intensity. "There is one more thing," Foster said, and reached into the briefcase for the third time. I had written it on a Sunday afternoon in October of 2019, sitting at the drafting table in what used to be Margaret's sewing room, while her camellias held their ground against the first frost outside the window and the mountain light pressed gray against the glass. I had written it because Vanessa had brought me to a Ridgeline investor dinner that year and introduced me to a table of partners as my father. He's retired, not Dad, not Warren, made me convenient to summarize. I drove home that evening and sat at the drafting table for a long time before I picked up a pen. "Your father gave me this 5 years ago," Foster said quietly, holding out a sealed envelope with Vanessa's name written across the front in my own careful hand. The deliberate handwriting of an engineer who learned early that unclear notation causes expensive mistakes. He asked me to hold it until the time was right. Vanessa took it with both hands. Her fingers were trembling visibly. She turned it over once, looking at her own name in my writing, and something in her face crumpled so fast and so completely she had to press her lips together hard to hold it together. "Do you want privacy?" Renata asked. Vanessa shook her head, a single unsteady motion, and broke the seal with her thumb. 2 pages of lined paper folded in thirds, the kind that came off the yellow legal pad I kept on the drafting table. She read it silently first, straight through, and I watched her face while she did, because I had written every word of it and I knew exactly where each one would land, and watching them arrive in her was one of the harder things I have willingly done in 63 years. Her chin began to tremble by the second paragraph. By the bottom of the first page, the tears had spilled over whether she wanted them to or not, quiet and unstoppable, the tears of someone who has run out of the resources required to hold them back. "Read it out loud," Priya Deshmukh said gently. Vanessa looked up at me. Her throat moved in a hard swallow. Then, with the particular courage of someone who understands that a thing witnessed by many carries more weight than a thing kept private, she unfolded the pages fully and began to read in a voice that shook from the first word and kept going anyway. "Vanessa, if you're reading this, it means I was wrong to believe that time alone would be enough to close whatever distance has grown between us. I'm not writing this to punish you. I'm writing it because I made a promise to your mother, and promises have a way of running out if you wait too long to keep them. I never needed you to remember every sacrifice. That isn't what sacrifice is for. What I needed, what I still need, is for you to remember this. A person's worth was never the square footage of their office or the label on their blazer. I raised you to know that. What I don't know anymore is whether you still believe it. The day you treat someone as less than they are because of what they wear or what they drive, or how loudly they're willing to fight for themselves, that's the day you've lost something no amount of revenue will ever buy back. I love you. Not the version of you that closes acquisitions or appears in business magazines. The girl who fell asleep on my shoulder on long drives home from soccer practice. The young woman who cried at her mother's funeral without apologizing for it. That person is worth any amount of waiting. I hope when you read this, you agree. Dad, October 2019. The ballroom was completely, absolutely quiet. Vanessa lowered the pages. Her face was wet, and she made no move to address it. No hand raised to wipe her cheek, no controlled recovery. She simply stood in the middle of her own company's 10th anniversary and let 200 people see exactly what those words had done to her. Maisie had moved from her table at some point during the reading. She stood 15 feet away, small hands clasped in front of her navy dress, watching her mother with an expression far too old for 9 years. The expression of a child who loves 2 people and has been quietly hoping, for weeks, that this was the moment it stopped hurting. Vanessa saw her daughter, and something in her seemed to finally break all the way open. "Maisie," she said, her voice destroyed and barely audible. "Sweetheart, I'm so sorry." Maisie crossed the distance at a run and wrapped both arms around her mother's middle, and Vanessa bent over her and cried in a way that had nothing managed about it at all. I looked down at Margaret's handkerchief still folded in my hand, and thought, Margaret, I think this might be what watching over her looks like. Marcus stood alone now, the space around him having widened the way a room clears around a structural failure, once everyone recognizes what they're looking at. His face had gone the color of the tablecloths. "Vanessa," he said, "I can explain the timeline, I can." She lifted her head from Maisie's hair and looked at him, and whatever had been holding her together through the reading finally gave way to something colder. "Did you plan this?" she asked. "The toast tonight, the things you told me about my father for months. Did you build all of it?" "Piece by piece, so I'd say those words myself, on camera in front of the board." Marcus's mouth opened. Nothing useful came out of it. "Answer me," Vanessa said, and her voice had steadied into something I recognized, the same voice she'd used at 9 years old, refusing to back down from an argument she knew she was right about. "I did it for us," Marcus finally said. "For the company. Your father was always going to be a variable neither of us could control, and You needed control," Renata said evenly. "Of a 54% stake you believed you could pry loose from a man you'd convinced yourself was too old and too irrelevant to fight back. Mr. Whitfield, the board will be reviewing your conduct formally on Monday. I'd advise you to retain independent counsel before then, separate from whoever helped you build this case." Marcus looked around the ballroom, at Nathaniel Cross standing beside my chair, at Foster's open briefcase, at his wife with their daughter's arms locked around her waist and tears still on her face. And I watched him understand, in real time, that there was no version of the next 30 seconds that ended in his favor. He turned and walked toward the exit without another word, and this time nobody offered to hold the door for him. Vanessa didn't watch him go. She was looking at me. She crossed the floor slowly, Maisie still holding one hand, and stopped in front of my chair. Up close, I could see her eyes were red-rimmed, her composure gone entirely, replaced by something rawer and more honest than I'd seen from her in years. "Dad." Her voice cracked on the single word. "I said those things to 200 people. I said them because I believed every lie he told me, and I didn't check, I didn't call you, I didn't ask you a single question before I stood up there, and—" She stopped, pressed her fist against her mouth. I stood, my knee protesting the whole way up, and put my hand on her shoulder. "I know," I said. "I know you didn't mean it the way it sounded. And I know you didn't know what you were standing on when you said it. How can you not be furious with me?" "I am furious," I told her honestly. "Just not at you the way you think. I'm furious at every month he spent feeding you a version of me that isn't true. And I'm furious I didn't see it sooner." I squeezed her shoulder. "But you're my daughter. That doesn't get renegotiated because of one terrible night, even a night like this one." She made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite a sob, and reached out and gripped my forearm the way a person grips a railing. "I should have called you more," she said. "This past year. I told myself you liked the quiet. Truth is, it was easier not to look too closely at how far apart we drifted." "You drifted," I said. "People do. It doesn't mean you're gone. Above us." Renata cleared her throat gently. "Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the board, I want to thank you for your patience this evening. The formal business of the gala will resume shortly. What you've witnessed tonight will be handled appropriately and privately from here." The band, after a long, uncertain pause, began playing again, and the room slowly exhaled itself back into something resembling a party, though a noticeably quieter one. By 10:40 that night, the Ashcombe Grand's lobby had become a different kind of room entirely. Vanessa sat beside me on a bench near the revolving doors, Maisie curled against her other side, half asleep now that the worst of the evening had passed over her. "What happens now?" Vanessa asked, staring at nothing in particular. "Monday, the board meets," I said. "Renata chairs it. Foster presents the trust in full. Marcus's conduct gets formally reviewed. Beyond that," I looked at her, "that part's yours to decide, not mine. She nodded slowly. I already told him not to come home tonight. I don't know what that means yet, long term. But I know I'm not pretending anymore that I didn't hear what I heard in that folder Foster showed us. You don't have to decide all of it tonight. I know. She was quiet for a moment, watching the December wind push dead leaves across the lit entrance outside. Dad, why did you come tonight? If you suspected something was wrong with the invitation, why walk straight into it? Because you're my daughter, I said. The way a person says the sky is blue. If there was a chance it was just a party, and I stayed home out of suspicion, I'd never have forgiven myself. I paused, and because I wanted to see Maisie. She made that same broken half-law again, and reached over and gripped my hand tightly the way she used to as a small child crossing a parking lot. I love you, she said. I don't think I said that enough this year. I don't think I said it at all. You're saying it now, I told her. That's the part I'm going to remember. 4 days later, on the morning of December 23rd, I was standing at my kitchen counter in Asheville pouring a second cup of coffee when I heard tires on the gravel driveway outside. I set the mug down and looked out the window above the sink. The same window Margaret used to lean against every morning, checking on her camellias the way some people check on children. The bushes were bare-branched now, stripped down by the cold the way Appalachian winters strip everything eventually, but I'd wrapped burlap around the base of each one the way she'd taught me 20 years ago, and I expected they'd come back stubborn and pink come February, the way they always did. Vanessa's car pulled up short of the garage. The rear door swung open before the engine had fully settled, and Maisie came flying out at a dead sprint, sneakers scattering gravel, her coat unzipped and flapping behind her like she'd decided somewhere on the drive that cold weather was merely a suggestion. Grandpa. Full volume, the kind that carries down the whole block. I pushed through the front door and she hit me like a small freight train, both arms locking around my waist. I held on and didn't pretend, not even for a second, that my eyes weren't stinging. Hey, baby girl, I managed. You're going to knock me clean off this porch. She pulled back just far enough to look up at me, eyes fierce and bright. Good. You need somebody to check on you more. I told Mom that the whole drive here. Vanessa came up the walk behind her, hands in her coat pockets, shoulders slightly rounded against the cold. She looked different than she had 4 nights earlier. Not fixed. Nothing gets fixed that fast, but lighter. Like she'd finally set something down she'd been carrying wrong for a long time. I should have come sooner, she said, stopping at the bottom step. Not just this week. Years sooner, Dad. You're here now, I said. That counts for more than you think. She climbed the steps and I pulled her in, Maisie still tucked against my other side, and for a moment the 3 of us stood together on that old porch in the gray winter light. And I didn't say anything at all, because some moments don't need language. They just need weight. They just need presence. I thought about Margaret, about how she used to leave the porch light burning, even on nights Vanessa wasn't due back from college until well past midnight. She needs to see it from the driveway, she used to say, when I suggested turning it off to save the bulb. She needs to know somebody's still up. I'd left that light on every night for 9 years. I'd told myself it was habit. Standing here now, with both of them pressed against me, I understood it had never been habit at all. Foster called this morning, Vanessa said, once we were inside and the coffee was pouring for 3 instead of 1. Board confirmed Monday's emergency session went through cleanly. Marcus isn't contesting the findings. His attorney reached out about a separation agreement, both personal and with the company. She paused. I'm not going to pretend that part doesn't hurt, but it's the right thing. It's a lot to carry into Christmas, I said. I'd rather carry it honestly than keep pretending everything was fine. She looked at me steadily, more like the young woman who used to spread charts across this table than the CEO who'd stood at a podium 4 nights earlier. I want you at every board meeting from here forward, not as a silent partner, as my father who happens to also be the reason any of this exists. I looked down at Maisie, who was already eyeing the freezer with the particular focus of a child who knows exactly what's hidden inside it. What I have, I told her, is hot coffee. And there's a tin of your great-grandmother's snickerdoodles in the back of the freezer I've been saving since last December because I couldn't quite bring myself to eat them alone. Maisie's whole face transformed. Grandma's cookies, she said, already moving toward the kitchen door. The actual ones? The very ones. She grabbed my hand with both of hers and pulled, and I let her set the pace, let her lead the way, and followed her through the door into the warmth of a kitchen, where the coffee was hot and the windows were fogged pale at the edges from the cold outside. Vanessa stepped in behind us and held the door. As I crossed the threshold, I reached over and clicked off the porch light. The morning was full and gray and quiet and lit from the inside. Everybody was home. We didn't need it burning anymore. Standing in that kitchen with the people who never actually stopped loving me, even when someone worked hard to convince one of them otherwise, I understood something it had taken me 63 years to fully learn. Real love doesn't demand an audience, it doesn't compete for applause, and it doesn't wait for a perfect moment to show up. It quietly arrives when everything else falls apart, offers a steady hand, and stays long after everyone else has gone home. That kind of love outlasts pride. It outlasts money. It certainly outlasts whatever lie someone tells you to make you doubt it. Looking back, I don't regret staying quiet about the trust for 12 years. I regret believing, even briefly, that silence and protection were the same thing. If I had it to do differently, I'd have spoken more plainly, sooner, set clearer boundaries, and taught the people I love to recognize the difference between someone earning their trust and someone simply managing it. Some people call a story like this one a revenge story. I think that misses the point entirely. This was never about punishing my daughter or even punishing Marcus. It was about letting the truth stand in a room long enough for the people who loved each other to find their way back to that love, instead of the version of each other someone else had built for them. The greatest inheritance was never the trust, or the 54% or even the company. It was learning, at 63, that it is never too late to be seen clearly by the people who matter most, and never too late for them to see you clearly back. If this one stayed with you, tell me in the comments which part hit hardest. Share it with someone who needs to hear tonight that it's not too late to set the record straight. And if you're new here, stay a while. There are more stories like this one waiting for you. Thank you for staying until the last word. As always, this story contains fictional elements woven in for the sake of the telling. If that's not for you, I understand completely, but if you're still here, I hope to see you again next time.